All right, welcome back once again. Tonight in the lesson, we're going to cover some more non-Ableton specific stuff of some going further into basics of um, techniques of bass production and kicks and percussion and stuff, and just kind of setting up another little example track to just go a little bit deeper into those topics, progressing on from where we started last time. So, again, a note, this isn't going to be like the greatest track ever that we're making and all this kind of stuff. And we're just progressing on in basic levels from where we started before, but just going a little deeper into how we are getting into the production of all these, kick, percussion, bass, sub, etc., and, basic mixing and functions like that, just progressing on from where we were at before. Um, so with that being said, let's get started. So we're starting a track here. You can see I already have some stuff laid out just, so I didn't have to waste time during the stream to get this set up and do the clicking and stuff. But we're going to go through it one thing at a time, like we're setting it up. So we start, as always, we got our Ableton settings open. We've got our audio and everything set up. We've got that tested, working, etc. We're all good to go. That's first step, right? And then next step is we're going to want to make a project. I have one started up here, you can see, obviously, but then we just want to have our project saved in a location where we're going to manage it and everything. And then for my case, I'm going to go over to the main master channel and to see I've got my stream plugin set up, and I've got my headphone monitoring software, set up over here. Those are just specific to my case here. But yeah, so we've got ourselves set up here to go. Next thing is starting with a general idea of what we were going to do. I thought we're just going to do some basic drum and bass type arrangements. So I'm going to start going over and setting the tempo, the BPM over here at 172, just setting that. And yeah, then we're good to go. So starting out making a basic kick and snare pattern just to base our rhythm off, everything like that. There's a couple ways you can do that. You can synthesize your own kicks and snares, which is something that you may and probably eventually will want to get more into because it's pretty fun and it gives you lots of creative control over the sound that you're designing. But there are multiple ways you can go about creating that stuff. So for one example, here I've got the plugin Kick2. Kick2 is a really nice, kick drum plugin and stuff. I'm not endorsing or recommending that you have to buy this or this is what you have to use. But it's a really useful plugin, lots of features, and can show you a lot of things here. Just starting out with just muting all this stuff. And so, yeah, to start out with, we've got a Kick2 plugin loaded on a MIDI channel here. And you open it up and you can see that you're greeted with this waveform of the kick sample itself. And when you play it, you can hear it there. And let's see here. And the cool thing about Kick2 is that it has this visual waveform of the kick laid out, and it also has these points that you can drag and adjust that shape. You can see it changes dramatically the shape of the waveform for the kick that you're dealing with. And they also come with tuning and frequency markers on each of the points. So it's a really easy way to tune your kick drums and tune your drums. The transient in the beginning, the transient, like the sharp, like whack sound of a drum hit doesn't really have a discernible pitch to it. But as the line of the waveform spreads out more, you can see this is the bass, that oomph part of the kick that does have a discernible pitch to it. And so generally speaking, you want to have your drums tuned to your project. it matters more and less in certain cases, that's for sure. But that's a topic in itself of just generally having your drums tuned to your projects. In certain genres like drum and bass, that's a really big thing where people, you've probably heard drum and bass tracks before where especially years ago in neurofunk or something, where the drum or where the snare had a real tonal sound to it and made this real discernible like doot kind of, note to it actually in the snare hit. Yeah, along with the kicks as well too. In things like drum and bass, it's very common to have your kicks and your snares and even other percussions and stuff very much in tune to the pitch of your track. So with that being said, I don't know. I was just playing around with the note of D sharp. You can see I have this point here. Like I said, in the beginning, in the transient section here, where they're really close together, that's just that sharp whack sound of the transient, which you don't really hear a pitch to. And that's the design of, if you remember in the previous video we did, I showed a real basic example of how to synthesize a kick where you're essentially just taking like a sine wave and having it go from really high down to really low, really fast, and that's this curve right here. And that extremely fast drop in pitch of the wave in the beginning is what creates that transient, that whack sound of the kick, and then it fades out into this, the whack plus the doof, part, the transient and the rest of the kick that forms it. And so you can see I've tuned that here to D sharp here, and then this part down here as well, and then it fades off into nothing, into volume. This is one of the so-called drum and bass preset kicks that is in kick 2. You have a bunch of other kicks you can select from as well, techno and all sorts of other kind of flavor tuned things. And then I programmed in a basic pattern, click, make a MIDI clip. Have one hit here, one hit there. You can play that, and hear that back here. I'll turn up the volume a little bit. Yeah. So, so we have a kick set up, playing a pattern, and then kick 2 also does snares. So I have just another copy of it over here that I have a snare, one of their drum and bass snare samples loaded. You can see in that example of the snare drum, is it bigger? No, you can see in that example of the snare drum how, it's a snare, it's a really sharp, fast, transient sound. It goes down pitch really fast like this, and you can adjust it, tune it to the D sharp like that there, and programmed in a snare pattern. Yeah, pretty basic. Again, Kick2 is a great plugin. Not saying you have to use it. There's plenty of others that do similar things and other options. But yeah, so I've got the kick and the snare programmed in like that. And then you see, starting with these 2 first channels and a common theme there, I've got my audio effects rack laid out that is my basic utility rack that I'm using on everything, because it's doing the same functions that I need to do on basically every channel, which is gain staging. I just have a utility plugin here, which does a few other things like manages stereo panning and width, and can put tracks in mono, put the bass in mono, that kind of thing. Yeah, balances panning. DC offset eliminates extremely low subaudible frequencies and stuff. None of that's important in this case. I'm just using it as a basic way to adjust the input gain that's going through the rack and out the output here. If you can see, yeah, you can see this, the small meter down here where it lights up a little red. I mean, this thing has a clipper on it anyways. This limiter over here that's limiting the output, but it still is coming out pretty loud into the EQ that I have here. I'm using Pro Q4. I've pointed that out before. You can use the stock Ableton EQ8 in place of that, or FL Studio EQ. It's totally fine. They just have little differences in their function, you know, like they're still an EQ, they still do this, the same thing and all that. You can see Ableton stock EQ down here in the corner tells you the frequency and the note name and the level, and all the information is still presented down there, which is really useful. And remember, there's this button to make it bigger or not, and you can add and turn off more points here as well. But yeah, I'm just using Pro Q4. It's a third-party plugin. You don't have to use it. You can use the stock ones from whatever DAW you're using. It's doing the same thing. Yeah, and I have the high pass of the kick set at 20 hertz in this case, just to cut, you know, a bit of that end where you really don't need any frequencies below that. And yeah, the basic shape of the kick here, and can be adjusted to taste, you know, whatever you want to do there. And then the final output on here, I have the glue compressor. This is just I mean, basically, it's a glue compressor. It's a compressor that is a specific model and function of a compressor. Glue that is, you know, as in like it kind of like helps glue together sounds, and it can be very, very nice and used, you know, if used properly, you know, give really good sound. That's a stock effect, you know, here in Ableton, but basically I'm just using that in this case, in this rack where I can do some compression with it. Like I could turn this down, you know, I could turn down this threshold until the needle starts to move there, you know, and start to compress, you know, start to compress my kick. And I've got the attack and the release set on there. In this case, in the common, like, general default setup I have for this, I'm just using it with attack, maximum attack and really low release and a high ratio, meaning that if I want to apply some of this threshold, it will, the attack is long, 30 milliseconds in this case, so it will, it's like the attack won't crush the threshold of the compressor won't crush the transients and the attacks of sounds. It will more like that will fade in with this longer attack time and let go with the release right away. And so it's just kind of a way to like compress down, soften up some of the sounds if I want to do that a little bit. We'll go into compression, you know, more detail and future stuff for sure. But in this case, I'm really just using it for, in most cases, I can do a little compression with the threshold by bringing that down if I want to. And then with the makeup gain is the important part, where I turn up this makeup gain and make it louder, and you can see it starts to clip the soft clip thing here. Starts to clip the soft clip indicator here, which in this case with a kick drum, I'm actually going to turn that off, put this back just down to nothing. I mean, I could even just like turn it off and not use it, and put a limiter on there. And then with that, I could crank up the limiter. You see a good level, like, you know, plus 6 dB, and you can see it's limiting, it's clipping the limiter there. And then, yeah, that gives my kick to a nice, just real clipped, limited sound level. And then once that level in the channel is managed, I can adjust the final output of it via the channel fader here and set it to a good level there. So let's just set that. And you can see no matter what level that's being set at, it still is clipping, peaking like right here at the same level, you know? So it's a loud sound, and especially in genres like drum and bass where sounds are generally mixed very loud and very audible, like every sound is loud and heard very clearly in the mix. That's how they're doing that, is by step one, generating the sound, whatever that is, bass, kick, you know, whatever sound, generating the sound, putting it through a gain staging and you know, shaping chain and EQing it and everything. And then the output of it is being limited to the extent, see, that's what I do with the glue compressor here often, is not necessarily with the limiter, but I can push that sound up with this makeup gain until it starts to clip there, and the soft clip. Soft clipping means it's adding some harmonics and clipping like the edge of it just in a softer, different way. And then, but you see, I'm pushing it up until it starts to clip there, and then it's like that sound is being pushed up to that max volume and clipping it at that final output level there of 0. So then whatever level I put the sound coming out into the mix at, it is always going to be played at that consistent high volume, consistent volume level. So that's how you have sounds that are arranged in a mix like this at different levels. Not all sounds are being played at the same, loud level, but their volume is being managed in the channel to where they are very clear and very audible, and in a lot of cases, stylistically too, for like drum and bass and stuff, being clipped or limited a bit, to give that real loud sound. So in this case, though, I'm using a limiter because it's kick and snare sample, and so you can just chop it with a limiter, and it actually, sounds quite good in this case, So there, we've got our nice loud kick. I can adjust that down. Same goes for the snare. Just going to put the same limiter onto the snare channel and also turn that off. You can see in this case, it's really, the snare is really loud. Yeah, EQing it. Here's the snare. You see this bump in the bottom here, like that. Pro Q, you can also like hover over like this, and it'll freeze the image for you until you like, oh yeah, your snare is sitting at an E there, or basically an E. It's tuned to a D sharp right below it. And yeah, so that bump in the low end there, that is the, the body of the snare, the doo, sound. And I could, so I could EQ it appropriately to whatever kind of sound I want with that. And then also, the highs up here. You can solo in Pro Q4 like this. You can solo with this little headphone button and listen to just that range of the EQ, which is nice. So you can hear the different parts of the EQ of the snare, what's doing what. You could say, oh, it's a little, like I wanted a little, you could say, oh, I wanted a little louder in the mid body and a little less in the highs, or something like that. Do some ear EQing to it, and cool. We got our little, kick snare pattern set up. Put that in a group and call it kick snare bus, and then I can manage the output of the kick and the snare together. Those are instruments that are often in this style of music grouped together because they're both doing a similar function and a similar role in the mix. They are loud, and everything else is being sidechained to them to allow them to punch through the mix really clearly. So I have them in their own group here. Again, you just select those and hit Control G or right click and group, and then rename it something like kick snare bus. Bus often being used for channel subgroups in mixing. Bus, like everyone gets on the bus kind of thing. It's a bus, it's carrying other channels. And it can just help when you're identifying stuff in mixes, when you're, say, using these menu options to like go down and you're like, oh, where's the thing I want? Which one is that? Oh, it's just, calling it the bus. It helps you remember or identify that, oh yeah, that's the group carrying that stuff. So let's see, then on the bus, I have just the same, effects rack, same management thing going on. You can see I've got the gain adjustment and EQing just like before. You can see the output of the EQ up here too, and it's telling me the peak of it is minus 0.29. Not in this case. I can turn it up actually and have it going, I still have plenty of headroom in there that it's not clipping in that in this EQ. Yeah, just managing that final output level of the kick and the snare a bit, and then bringing it down. I would realistically be using a transient shaper on these. Transient Master by Native Instruments or other transient shapers. I linked a free set of plugins from the company Kilohertz, which makes really good stuff that you can like sign up for their, you can like make an account on their website and download their installer and sign up and download their pack of free plugins. But they have a transient shaper in that set, along with a lot of other really great basic tools for free. Transients, like you're talking about transients of the transient being the hit part, like the whack, part of the percussion hit. this transient shapers will do things to that, like this is increasing the attack of the transient. You might be able to hear that if you've listened to. If I turn up a lot, you hear how it really crushes. It really increases that transient. So I can turn that up to give more smack, more transient action, transient boost to the sound. I can reduce the sustain of the overall sound if I wanted, or increase it. So do some transient shaping to drums like that to really make them punch. And then this is being limited and clipped on the end too. And I could turn it up or crush it more or whatever. But yeah, transient shaping to help get a really nice, powerful drum hit. That can be why, some drum hits, like you're like, why do my drums sound like anemic and sound like shit? And they don't, they don't smack like other stuff. Well, they're doing transient shaping and limiting and compressing to it to really crush it and get this output sound that sounds like, put the same transient shaper on the snare, just leave it like that for now, because that will give you the output that sounds more like samples. I mean, using drum samples is another way to do that, right? So I have this example then here too. Instead of the Kick 2 version, we're using samples. And I've got a sampler set up here with samples plugged into it. I've showed this in a lesson before, but I have a whole bunch of samples dropped into the zone thing that open, or you can just drop it right into the sampler, right into here. And then they all come up in a line like this. And then you can go over to the selection tab over here in Ableton Sampler Selection, and these will all be blue bars, and you just right click and hit distribute ranges equally, and that distributes it equally throughout here. And if you remember before in Ableton, I grouped it into just Control G on the sampler to put it into a group so that you have these knobs over here. And then I mapped over here on the selector, right click, map to macro 1. And now that selector thing, which you can just click to select different samples, is mapped to this knob. And I can scroll through that knob, different samples. And yeah. But if I go through a sample, you can see, let's see, this one. Or is that not the one? All right, we'll go to number 1. If you click on the individual samples, you can see them here, and you can see how this one, it has that, yeah, it's real flat, it's real crushed, it's had that transient accentuation, transient shaping, and limiting and compressing done to it that makes those really powerful drum sounds that we're used to hearing. So that's how that's done. These samples already have that being done to it. You can see, so got a drum sample, a kick drum sample here, same setup with the same, pattern playing, and then just a snare, a list of snares also to scroll through. And then, so that's using samples as a way instead of synthesizing or using a plugin for your kicks and snares. So I've got that set up here. Can change sample. Yeah. So, all right. And then just like that before, there's going into the kick snare bus, still being managed in the same fashion. Same kind of management here with the gain staging, level output, and then you see in this case I have the EQ on the snare. I can move this all the way up because I don't need any sub bass in my snare, right? And EQ it as desired, whatever. Yeah. Drums. Okay, so we got the drum part, and then bass, sub bass. I've just got a sub patch here in Serum. Compulsive saving, hotkey hitting, Control S. Yep, it's a good habit, just compulsively hitting Control S. Saving your project. I'm using Serum here in this case, but again, the synthesis principles are the same if you're using other plugins. Why can't I make this bigger? There we go. Serum's a good one, I mean, again, I'm never saying, oh, you should buy this plugin. But I mean, Serum's great. They came out with Serum 2. It's definitely God tier, amazing synth plugin. I'm not saying you should buy it and everything, but so I've got a bass made in this. It's pretty simple. It's a sine wave and a noise wave. The noise is giving that what sounds like distortion, but it's not actually distortion, it's just noise. But it gives it that, that fuzzy, like heavy sound. Turn the noise off, you hear just a clean sub. But yeah, one voice sub going through, sine wave. In this case, I have some modulation that's just like turning the bass or turning the noise level up and down a little bit. It can change that, as it goes through. And the noise is being filtered through this filter that's just taking out the low part of the noise, keeping the high part of it. The FX, I just have some distortion and let me play this. Distortion. And an EQ, just taking a notch out of the middle. Distortion. Distortion. In low sub sounds, like generally you're using generally pretty much like you're using a cleaner sounding wave with less harmonics for subs, like a triangle or a sine wave commonly for sub bass, because you're just wanting that pure low subtone, and it makes it hard to hear at lower pitches, lower octaves. It can be harder to hear. So distortion is adding harmonics. It's adding harmonic saturation to a sound, which in a sub bass case makes it a lot easier to hear, makes it more audible. I already got the sound kind of blasted and turned up loud, but if I turned it down, if I took all that gain staging stuff off and turned off the here's the bypass for the distortion. If I bypass the distortion, turn down the output, you hear it now. Okay, it's still got the noise in it. I mean, you can hear it, but if I turn on the distortion, there's a bit more to it. I've got a little bit more distortion in this tube amp plugin here. And it just gives it a little more of that low mids sound. And then, of course, with the noise being thrown in there, it makes it really audible. I had it turned up. Yeah, so that's our sub. It's pretty simple, but again, the sine wave, noise principle, a little bit of distortion, some EQing to it. Yeah, this is another, I think it's free, plugin, Voxengo. This company here, Voxengo, makes a bunch of really great stuff. You might have heard of their famous plugin Span, which is a good one too. This is just a tube amp. It's just another tube amplifier plugin. I've got some drive set up on there. Again, adjust to taste. In this case, it's got a dry mix too. Dry meaning when the signal is wet, it's wet with the signal, and dry means has no signal on it of this plugin. So you can turn up the dry amount and then blend it in with the effect as much as you want, which can be, again, it's that dry wet feature like I talked about with plugins in the past, where plugins all look different, do different things, but they all have general same feature sets. That's this dry mix or dry wet feature that basically all FX plugins have, where you can adjust the amount that's being applied to it. After that, EQ. You see I've just got it all the way open to the bottom here. I mean, letting a full sub bass roll in, and here I have some of the highs cut. This function in ProQ, again, soloing it lets you hear what's on the other side of the line, what's being cut out, and so you can play that and listen and hear you're like, okay, 10,000 hertz, you know, like I set it at 10,000, 10K, and everything above it is just like this, you know, is like nothing that you need. So got the sub EQ'd there, a little bit of level management there. And then in this case, I'm doing a compression method, a sidechain compression method here, where I've got a compressor that is being set, triggered from external source, triggered from a sidechain. You could just have it being set, triggered from the kick, the MIDI part of the kick here. But in this case, I'm doing a trick that can be kind of useful. I showed it once before where I create a copy of what I want to sidechain. So I have a copy of the kick and a copy of the snare here, playing the same MIDI pattern, but playing a synth that is making just a sharp, very short noise burst. I've got it set to noise here, and I have the attack just set at, I have it just set open, where it just starts as an open signal as opposed to the attack being down here like this at first. I just have it up. It doesn't matter. It's just it's playing a very short noise burst, just a instead of, you know, the doof doof sound of the kick, because that will trigger the compressor differently. Because when the sound of the sidechain comes through the compressor, it triggers the threshold of it. It triggers it, and the longer or shorter that sound duration is, the longer or shorter that triggering of the compressor will be. So having just a short click, 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 triggering the compressor is very clean and always the same, and it's triggering it differently. But in that sense, I have just the kick triggering the sidechain of the compressor here, the threshold all the way down here, and the release set, you know, just low enough, and you'll see the you can see the shape here. Let's see, is this a solid note here? Yeah, this is a solid note, so play that instead, it's more audible. So you can see the kick triggering the compressor there, and that line, that V shape of it fading back up to full volume, and that's adjusted with the release. You know, you can set it to something and adjust the... And so I have it set real quick like that. You can see it fading back up quite quickly, cutting the bass and then fading back up. But if I increase it a lot, you'll see what happens. So that's something that can be done to taste stylistically, you know, having the bass like fade in depending on the release length of the sidechain. Is a common technique for getting the type of sound that you want, because you can have it fading in like that after, you know, longer after the kick, or you can have it just triggering like on off with the compressor, you know, like that. So I've got my sub bass here, compressor being triggered from the kick snare bus playing, and we've got those two things playing together. You hear what it sounds like without that compressor. And then with the compressor on, those kicks and well, kick in this case, and the snare, you know, are punching through a lot cleaner. I mean, it's you know, fading a bit on this. Have another compressor here that I could set to the snare and fade that just a little bit, not as much, not all the way down to the bottom with a threshold like that, but just set at something, you know, like this. Yeah, so we've got our compression rocking back and forth, our little sub bass lines here. Just played some notes here like this. Back and forth, easy. Yeah, drums, we got bass. Now, moving into the next group over here, we've got percussions. I just, again, used like a percussion example, a sample example like this. You can see I've just got samples thrown in the sample here. I can scan through again with that select. In this case, I don't have the select set up to a knob. I just click through it like this. Like a typical one, you know. You can see it playing here. So I've got top-end drum samples with that. Turn everything That's off in this channel. I've got that. Yeah, it's a sample method. You can see same stuff here. Oh, in the filter or in the sampler, I can use the filter and then built into the sampler. Most samplers have it. Put in the high pass and then filter that in. And you can do the same thing with the EQ afterwards. You know, I've got it set here that anyways, but there's a filter built into the sampler, and you can adjust the sound of the output with that stylistically as well. And yeah, the default volume in Ableton sampler is turned down quite a bit. It's like -12, and so I just turned it up to -6. Got my sample playing, and yeah, going through some EQ, cutting out the lows here, just really having it. Now doing some EQing to it like that. Got the signal boosted here again. And then the level being set here too. You know, the thing about having something like this on the end of your chain here that you use on stuff, you know, you could do that with like, oh, let's see, a saturator has a similar function. You know, saturator is also clipping it. Like I said, a limiter, that kind of stuff. It's clipping the signal. So in things like drum and bass music, you can have this, you know that, like I said, whatever level this is turned up, you can have this all the way up at 0 on the channel for the fader for the channel, but it's never going to be clipping over 0. You know, it's never going to be clipping into the red over on your channel because it's always being clipped by this here, you know, in the end. So that's just like pretty common technique people are using, and you can crank it up, like I said, to make it fucking loud if you want, you know, like. You know, adjusting the output, but then clipping it like that. So I've got top end sample there. You can do something similar, just using using a non-pre-made loop though. I've just got some MIDI notes triggering here. You know, you can just even just have like a repeating note like this, but with just a hi-hat sample, just this one hi-hat sample. You can hear sidechaining happening on this channel because I've got this on there. I'm turning that off right now. We're going to get to that in a second. Yeah, just a hi-hat being triggered over and over again by a fast repeating note like that, 16th note. I just played a few notes out with some different pitches in the sampler. It just sounds a little different. And oh, you might have noticed me doing that in Ableton when you can solo stuff. If you remember about the settings I went through before with was it Warp Record Launch? Warp Record Launch setting in the Ableton settings, there's exclusive, arm, and solo, and I talked about turning those off so you can solo and arm multiple things, which is really useful. But also, if you have that stuff, like multiple ones turned on, if you hold Control and click it, it will like unsolo everything else. You know, you can see I have these and I have to turn them all off individually, or I just hit Control and click, and that's like a master uncheck for that, just so you know. So I've got some hi-hat notes here. Yeah. Just another variation of how to make some percussions. I got another percussion variation here. What's this one? This one was just a percussion rack, percussion core kit from Ableton. Again, just it's not like this only applies to Ableton. Other programs, get some drum sounds in there. Just, you know, shaker, you know, whatever, some goofy percussion sounds, but just had some pattern programmed in here. You know, like that. Yeah. Here I have, you see how I have all these MIDI notes plugged in here, clicked in here, but they're turned off. So they're not deleted, but I can select them and turn them. I can select them and turn them on and off with the 0 key again. Now, so you can. It's just another way to work with the MIDI notes in Ableton. Is that wood block low? If you double click on it on the drum pad, it'll open up the sample. And you can see here some controls over it. You got the amplitude envelope and filter and stuff like that. Let's turn down the sustain down to 0 and then the release, or no, the decay out. Yeah. You see, changing the envelope of that sample to just suit it to taste. Let's put the filter on it. Turn that down again. And put the filter on OSR. We can add drive to it. Again, so just some drive like distortion. And turn that down a bit, but then if you really crank it up, you can hear that, you know, like. Now in this case, I can really crank it up and give it some harmonics, you know, distort it a little bit, almost adjust the level to a taste and, oops. Adjusting the output, again, same EQing and stuff here. Yeah. You can see like that part of the EQ, that's clearly that's clearly that wood block. Yeah. So another method of using percussion, making a percussion line in there. Yeah, another way of doing it. So you see, I've got, like I said, got the level adjusted in the channel, and then changing the overall output of it in the mix via the channel fader, the final output of it. So, you know, in this case, that percussion is like too loud. I want to turn it down. Okay, yeah, so we got drums, bass, adding another bass part to it here. I've got this. Just like a Reese, you know, kind of bass sound. That again is Serum. Again, the technique and the theory matters more than the plugin. But in this case, yeah, this main part of this theory is like, so I've got a saw wave, like this case, a Reese bass, not a clean sub bass, but you want something with a lot of harmonics, so you're using a saw wave, you know, with the sharp edges to it. That's you know, has a lot of harmonic content to it. And the unison is set up by this one. The unison, you can hear if it's down at 1. Turning up the unison. And remember the detune is adjusting that balance, but you can see all those different waves combined together in unison. That's what that is, you know, giving it that wide sound, that super saw sound. Yeah, and the blend balance of those waves. Now, again, yeah. So saw wave in unison, a notch filter over here, which the notch is taking that notch, cutting that notch out of the harmonic content, and moving it around is a big part of like neuro-based sound design, where it's creating that. It creates a scooping kind of whoosh, 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 moving around sound by automating that notch. So I have this LFO here with a shape drawn, going to automating the movement of this, the cutoff of that notch filter, you know. So that's that like phasing, like moving around sound of the notch being automated. And then I have some effects. I have this hyper dimension. This is like a phaser kind of dimension, you know. It's like a phaser kind of ish plugin basically. Gives it that sound. Adding, you know, how much you want of that. And then some distortion, again, just distortion cranked up a bit. Chorus is like, you know, think of like a chorus of voices singing together. Chorus is like the effect of making stuff sound wider, like it has artificial reflections to it and stuff. You can hear it's kind of just making it sound at like artificial like width of like multiple voices together sounding. Compressor in multi-band mode, just kind of cranking it up there, and with threshold turned down. Threshold cranked down to just, you know, boost the signal a lot there. And then, okay, this is a little more specific of Serum. There's this reverb filter, which I just couldn't help but use because it's cool, and it's like just a classic Serum bass thing, but you can hear with it off. I mean, that's still a Reese bass, you know, you can hear that. That's the classic Reese sound. Yeah, which this sounds cool, but this reverb filter is funny, and again, like, don't go using this on everything or something. It's just like one effects trick, but the reverb filter gives it this really interesting characteristics, like and then changing the cutoff knob here. Yeah, you can hear it does a lot to the sound, you know. I've also got the drive cranked up on it and stuff. Yeah. So use case, okay, in this case, Serum, you have these automation knobs over here you can map stuff to. You just click and drag over to what you want to automate, and then you set it, like in this case, if I want to automate the whole range of the knob, set the knob down at 0, and then click over here, click and drag this blue line so that it goes all the way up to the top, and now this knob controls that whole range. And then, like I talked about before, with that set, there's this little triangle knob over here in Ableton to open the plugins, and this configure button turns green. Click what you want to automate, unclick it, and now you have control over that knob in Ableton, and you can right-click and hit Show Automation to open up the automation lane for that, and you know, click in some automation for that. Yeah. So we have a Reese bass to add to the mix there. Yeah. So with that in the mix, I'm going to go to, again, why it's grouped. So you see, I have the groups divided up, and these are both pink. I should change the color, make it easier to see. So I've got the kick snare bus, right, with the kicks and the snares. Got my sub bass separate to just go with the kick and snare and the sub together. Sub, because the sub has its own very strong side chaining, you know, completely on, completely off, with the kick and all that going on. And then the rest, I have everything else I've got put into another group, another bus, just called the sidechain bus, because that is going to get some side chaining from the kick and snare as well, but not quite as extreme as the not as extreme as the sub. Now, so I still have the same kind of setup with the compressors on here for the kick and the snare. And then, yeah, so then that's everything else being compressed, I mean, being sidechained to the kick and the snare, so that this kick and the snare in, you know, drum and bass music can punch through very clearly in the mix. You see, if I really crank the thresholds down, you can hear it'll. I mean, it sounds kind of stupid, but you can hear, you know, what that's doing more. Yeah, but in this case, I just had it set, you know, at some lower level to taste, basically, and you know, set just adjusting it just to how it affects the sound and to the right mix, basically. Yeah. So now we're rocking. We got our basses and our sidechain and stuff. Oh yeah, that Reese bass, I could rename that, you know, Reese or something. That you see the EQing on it. Oh yeah, in that case, I just have it going through that tube amp plugin again, just giving a little more, you know, saturation, some distortion. Saturn 2, I don't worry about that. That's another Saturn's a really great distortion plugin. It's excellent, gives you like triple band, you know, multiple band controls, you know, that you can adjust to different parts of the harmonic. Saturn's amazing. We're not gonna go over that in this case. But yeah, it's great. It's a distortion plugin with more control. But in this case, yeah, I've got that free two-band, I think it's free two-band plugin from Voxengo. It's also really awesome. Sounds great. The EQ of it, you see the Reese. I'm actually going to cut out the low bass. I'm going to just like click and set that at like 110 hertz and increase the steepness of that high pass filter, because that non-sub part mixed with the sub bass Yeah, you hear it there. The sub, doing a separate sub, separate from the Reese, gives you different degrees of control, and also for mixing the sound, it sounds just a bit different and better, and you can make a real clean, strong sub bass that then mixes with the other bass to create kind of it's like the illusion that they're the same sound, but they're actually two separate things being managed separately, like you can see here. So, got that. What else? I put in an arpeggio thing for fun here. You know. It's a little hit sound. Oh, this is the arpeggiator thing. Yeah, just got an operator synth. Compulsive saving. Got an operator with just these voices turned up like. The filter turned down like this, and then the envelope being set so that it can adjust the filter. The filter, remember, the envelope is what's taking the filter and making it go like this, go like that to let the sound out, in this case. So that's what's giving it that plucky sound, and the decay of the envelope, the shape of that is adjusting that. Yeah, again, that's a real common thing you could automate. You could, for some change in a thing, you could, be automating the thing like that. That kind of thing, where creating change over time by automating the length of that envelope to make the notes go from shorter to longer, basically. I've got it going through just an EQ, here, same thing, and then going through the return, the send effects channels here, the reverb. And the delay. Reverb and the delay. The reverb, it's the stock one that's on there. I just put the same channel strip on there with the same just gain staging and EQ management. Took out the lows and the low mids of the EQ of the reverb sound a little bit, and it increased the decay length and the size of the reverb. That's all I did just to make it a longer reverb. Sounds bigger. Same thing with the delay. So that's same chain put on the delay here. Yeah, that stuff's running through the sidechain bus, remember, and we have the same thing going on there. Gain staging, adjusting the input, the gain level, the EQ, again cutting out in this case it's cutting out the low sub bass and giving you the level of control over it here. And that sidechaining to it, yeah. I added a second. What was this part actually? What was this? Oh yeah. An effects riser. So I have a long clip of 64 bars playing, and then one long clip here playing in the end, and that is also an operator synth, just with only with one voice playing, just nothing, just a sine wave playing. But then the LFO is modulating the destination of the oscillator A and the filter, and it's not being re-triggered. This R re-trigger is meaning re-triggering the LFO every time you play a note. I have that turned off, and I have it turned to sync. I have the amount turned up a bit, and the rate turned quick to 1/16, and then as it plays this long MIDI note, it goes, oh. Yeah, it's making a riser, I forgot. It's making a riser because of the pitched envelope. This pitch envelope part down here, got the amount turned up all the way to 100, turned on the button here. And essentially, again, non-Ableton specific version, it's creating a riser by creating a rising pitch using a pitch envelope. You could even just automate the pitch of the, the fine or coarse pitch of the wave. But in this case, the pitch envelope is just going up over time, following this line here. I have the attack. In this case, I have the attack just set way out like this, and the initial peak all the way down, and the peak level all the way up. And so then over that 20 seconds here, it's going all the way up. It's going from low to high, and then you can hear creating that the ascent to the effects, creating that riser effect enough. And then I have it set so that it's playing just that in the end, the end of a phrase. For this example, I'll just trigger it. Oh, again, Ableton, if you move your cursor over to this part of the bar where it turns into the little speaker, you can click and play from that point like I'll do here rather than playing from the beginning. So there in this point, I'll turn the channel on first. Okay, here we go. Yeah, some effects, basic thing like a riser to give that, movement, tension in a piece, in a tune. I mean, yeah, got that. What else was this? Did I put anything in here yet? No. Riser, ARP. Again, I would relabel this stuff as like relabel it as like ARP, and then this was just like another piece. Just some little accent hits of another contrasting synth part. Again, it's just messing with the levels of this operator synth. It's really easy to just, it's all set up in this, it's default set up in this FM stack mode here, which you can change how they're arranged, how the oscillators are arranged. The default mode is just one after the other in a total FM frequency modulation stack like this, and then just clicking around on the levels, just adjusting the levels like this, you'll see, how it changes the sound. And then I've adjusted the coarse meaning big, coarse tuning as opposed to fine tuning, the coarse tuning of that to just spread out to something interesting, and also have that filter being modulated by the envelope again, like that. Giving that little plucky sound, again, being adjusted by that decay amount here. Yeah, in this case, they're also playing really short MIDI notes, which, I could drag out a bit if I wanted to, but yeah, just something contrasting, another. Yeah, so all of that is going through the main master channel, obviously. So let's go to the master channel and open that up. And we've just been listening to it straight out at this point. But let's do something to it. We'll put that same old effects rack on there where you're adjusting the output volume and stuff here, the gain staging, EQ for the overall, output. And in this case, I put a saturator on it, gave it some drive. This is Roar plugin in Ableton 12, which is kind of new. I've just only experimented with a little bit. It's got a low, mid, and high. It's a multi-band saturation. You can see a wave, a saturation shaper here. You can adjust the level of saturation and stuff there, and the or the shaper, and you can give it different kinds of clipping and stuff and different models like that. Yeah, it's got some cool features to it. And I've just bumped up, just used a little bit, 6%, across the different frequencies to increase that, to give it that shaper amount, like wave shaper, like it's being sent through a clipping, algorithm of, different models. Like here's a tube model or a, digital clipping, bit crusher, or soft. I just have it on the soft, whatever. Different models you can experiment with and give it different amounts of levels. Let's give it 0.5 at the low. Let's give it 2 in the mids and 1 in the highs or something, and see how that sounds. And then again, going through a utility, just turning it down a little bit after that. Another EQ afterwards, where you could just mind the levels a bit, and then the output out through that, same glue compressor. Could do a bit of compression there if I wanted to. Yeah. And check it with it on and off, basically. Not exactly the same levels, so the effect isn't really there of comparing directly, but let's do it anyways. It's actually making it a little bit quieter. But yeah, just doing a little bit of adjustment here. And I'm checking our level of the EQ up here in the corner there. It tells you if we're clipping or not. We're not. We're good. We're not clipping. And we're clipping a little bit there in that output. Doesn't matter because I'm going to use a Pro L. It's a limiter. It's another limiter plugin. Just like you could use the stock Ableton ones too, but this one's nice visual interface. And that's where we're gonna push the sound up a bit. Turn it down to compensate for the output for the stream, but yeah, pushing it up with the limiter. Yeah, basic mixing. Of course, we're not going fully into depth with it right now, like, oh, this is a finished product and we're gonna, make it sound perfect and everything. Obviously not. But you can see that it sounds all right. I mean, it sounds pretty good, it doesn't sound like a problematic mix, like, oh God, it sounds horrible. How do I fix it? And that's because we've just done everything real simply, properly, going through all the sounds that we've made and managing them all properly. And basically, the kind of thing about mixing is that if you have taken the basic steps to make the sound when you're creating it in its channel here, sound the way that you want it to sound, and adjusted the level in the mix appropriately via, that final gain staging I was talking about. Well, if you've done that all properly, which, as you can see, is really not that hard. It's all the steps we've done just with this basic, stages here. Then all the sounds sit together in the mix pretty much as you want them to be to begin with. So then the final mix down stage of mixing down the whole thing becomes a lot easier because you're not trying to micromanage and fix things and solve problems and stuff. I mean, sure you are. You still do that kind of stuff, but it becomes a lot easier to mix and a lot more straightforward with minimal stuff done to achieve the mix that sounds good that you want. And often people will overcomplicate thinking mixing too, that you have to go like way overboard with often there's a less is more kind of approach to where if your source sounds are sounding good and how you want them to in the first place, then the mix down part really isn't that hard actually, because then the sounds are already placed in the way that you want them to be. So think about that. So in that case, we've got our main mix being managed here with not a lot to it, and in the end, we're checking it with the limiter, seeing, well, if I smash it with the limiter and like push that up, maximize it to the loud level that you want the final output of the track to be, what does it sound like? If you really crank the limiter up, like, does it start to fall apart in a certain area? Does parts of it start to sound terrible? That's an indicator of something that you could fix in the mix, like, for example. crank this up and listen to that. Yeah, you know, it sounds okay for right now. The kick and snare, that's an issue too that I'd comment on for mixing. People often will think that the kick and snare has to be way louder in the mix than it actually has to be. If I turn this all the way up, it's loud. I mean, I have them turned down in the group here to begin with, but yeah, the kick and snare don't need to be that loud, as loud as you might think, actually. And also with proper sidechaining, like we demonstrated in these groups and stuff, then the sounds punch through, because making a sound louder is not necessarily the way to make it more audible, like coming through clearer in the mix, you know. So with the sidechaining, the way we're ducking the volume for those kick and snare hits in the mix with the sub specifically, and then the sidechain bus here, that makes them audible even at lower levels, you know. And of course, the way to check that is we've got a reference track over here. I just have some drum and bass tune loaded up here. The loop of it set here. Again, importantly, when you're actually doing this, you want the audio to be sent not through the main master channel, because then it's being sent through all of the processing you have on your master channel. You don't want that. You want to hear it just naked on its own, right? You don't want to hear it going through your mixdown, you know, stuff in your master channel. So you want that audio sent to just the extension out, not the main channel. But in that case, for the stream, you won't be able to hear it because it's being sent directly through my sound card and bypassing the streaming module. So I'm just going to set it to the main in this case anyways, and turn all of this off. I can drag the limiter into that same audio channel group and let's turn that off, and then listen to the reference track. Have it turned off so we're not hearing it in the mix, of course, and then solo it. Got this turned way down. So what you're listening to in a reference track are certain things, like listen to it and ask yourself, like, how loud is the kick, you know? And you can hear, like, yeah, the kick's loud, but it's not standing out over top of the mix, you know? And that's what I mean, like, same for the snare. Let's listen to how loud the snare is in relation to the rest of the loud sounds. Yeah, now compared to our mix, so unsolo that, and then in this case, I'm going to turn this, you know, this rack back on, but yeah. And so you can hear that's how, like, oh, maybe a kick snare could be even lower. But that's the thing about using a reference track. That's why it's the greatest tool that you can use, and that's how people get good at making stuff sound the way they want it to, because without a reference, like, what does good sound like, you know? Like, how loud should my kick and snare and stuff be? How loud should my sub bass be? How loud should the, you know, all the different levels of the mixdown, what should they be like? Well, you're using a reference track of something similar, you know, like a similar sounding track, as your reference for making those decisions. And of course, more specifically, especially with sub and with bass and stuff, using some kind of monitoring software, like this is a spectrum analyzer called Span from that company Voxengo. Again, that's free and well known because it's free. And this is a way, let's listen to this again. Let's turn this shit off, you know, again. there's that hold button up there, and this just freezes the frame. So you can see like, okay, there's the bass obviously and everything through the spectrum. Putting your mouse on it there, like tells you in the corner up here. Okay, well, it's at 70 hertz, the bass hitting like that is minus 28 dB on this meter. And you can see it's about equal to the peaks of the highs like that. And then you could check the same thing with the same plugin on ours, drag it over, copy it over to our thing here, and turn that back on, and then do that for ours. Ah, not that. Okay. Okay, and then I freeze our mix here and see that, okay, well, for one thing, you can see there's this thing peaking up really high up here at 11K, and first of all, figuring out, like, what's that? That's probably as percussions, some percussion sound that needs to be adjusted, there. But then, okay, you can see roughly our sub bass is hitting at the same level as our highs there, roughly. We've got these peaks poking up here and here that are obviously some, like high percussion noises probably that need to, and stuff that need to be adjusted. They need to be reduced a little bit to make this, more even in the highs and stuff. But then you can see that, yeah, that looks, about right. The highs could be, yeah, these peaks reduced, and then overall highs pushed a little bit to make it more even with the, well, actually, no, not highs pushed, because again, that's another component of mixing too, is think about that, like pushing the level of something like the highs in this case, you say, oh, they need to be higher because they need to be more up here specifically. Well, do they? Or reducing the bass level a little bit until it's down to there, and then that's achieving the same effect. So in mixing, there's like give and take often like that. Reducing or increasing one area is doing the opposite effect to the opposite end of the balance of the sound, essentially. Like, basically, if you turn up the highs, the lows sound quieter because the highs are louder, and vice versa. So there are multiple ways to mix that don't always involve increasing the sound of something. You could also decrease the sound of the opposite balance to it and achieve the same effect without just increasing stuff. So this example shows that we've got these high peak, problems like that we turn down and fix. But in this case, the lows of the sub are loud enough, could actually come down a little bit in level. And that's another thing, along with the kick and snare, the sub volume is often, it's already at -6. Like it's not as loud as you often think it might need to be. So listen to that. Yeah, it's still, plenty loud. And there are more advanced ways to monitor this stuff, this reference and mixing levels and all that, which I would get into in the future using different plugins, different stuff you have to buy, that's or attain, that's not stock standard stuff. But basically, yeah, we've got that. We've got the basis of that. We've got our we could check the mix like that, go into our final EQ stage here and see what was that high stuff that was causing that problems. What was that in the spectrum? It was 11K. 11,000 right here. And yeah, you can hear it. Okay, it's the ringing noise. It's the ringing from this percussion. It's just like I thought, it's that. It's that high, this stuff right here. So you can click, add a point, and just reduce that. And yeah, really turn that down, frequency. And yeah, just turning that down. You can see I've got a shelf just kind of turning the highs down anyways here a little bit. Next one, this point here. So just honing in on using your eyes and your ears, honing in on those sounds that are too high or too strong, I mean, and adjusting like that one, that resonance, that one, like that. Yeah, just yeah, adjusting that, listening to the mix then. Yeah, you know, stuff like that. That's getting into more, you know, like tweaking the project like we mean it, like it's a finished product and all that, which, you know, we're not doing at this point. But there we go. I think we did something. Oh, I created a few more sub patterns. That's right. We got another one that goes like, you know, steady pattern and then. Yeah, just, I mean, that's songwriting stuff of just coming up with whatever melodies and patterns and stuff you want to do with it, you know. But basically, we went through, you know, advanced a level in the detail and technique of making a basic arrangement and mix and stuff. And you see how we're getting into writing a tune. And if we meant it more, you know, we'd be fixing stuff more specifically and making things sound better and fixing that snare sound that has too much body and low end and snare and that kind of stuff. And just, you know, all those things we can do, make it sound how we want and all that. Yeah, but there we go. I hope we had a good session. And if you guys have any questions about stuff, I mean, let me know. I don't know if there's anything that you want me to cover, go over again, or anything, any questions, comments, anything like that. You know, always, of course, you ask. Hit me up in the Discord channel if you have stuff later to ask about, anything like that. Yeah, arrangement, you know, we talked about that in previous lessons where you'd be using this clip view here is just a real easy workspace to get ideas down quickly. But then, of course, you can go copying those over to the arrangement view and laying them out into an actual, you know, song structure and doing all that. But yeah, that's basically it for this session. Got a few minutes till it's an even 90 minutes. Yeah, there's, of course, deeper levels you can get into tweaking all of this kind of stuff. But to recap basic, you know, basic theories of like creating your instruments to get the sounds that you want in different ways, you know, like you can use using samples or using synthesis or anything like that, and creative effects and stuff to create the sounds that you want. And then, you know, the basic gain stage management and all that stuff of EQing and just, you know, getting the sound to sit how you want it to be in the, what was that? It's like, where'd the CQ point come from? Yeah, getting the sounds to sound how you want them to be and then sit in the mix via the, you know, final output level and stuff. And then arranging them into buses according to these kind of basic categories of like a kick and a snare together in, you know, heavy dance music, a clean sub on its own, getting its own side chaining, you know, aggressive side chaining to go with the kick and the snare, and then the rest of the channels going through the side chain, getting their sidechain bus, getting their side chaining and management and all that stuff. Yeah, and then all coming out through a master channel mix down where you can adjusting the level and doing some mixing there, and then, you know, checking it, with checking it with a compressor or limiter, limiter cranked up, a bit to see how it sounds when it's actually pushed up to that kind of level. Yeah, those are the basic theories of stuff that can get into writing tunes and making them sound more how you imagine them. So, yeah, cool. All right, sweet. Well, yeah, I think that about covers it for this time. Yeah, thanks for tuning in.